Alice said, my name's Mary. I'm calling in from North Carolina in the States today. I'm a master's candidate in the Department of International Development, and I was lucky enough to spend some time this year looking into how ID master students who are completing their first English language degree encounter and navigate language barriers in seminars. So what kind of took me into this work was prior work experience in the international development sphere. Working in international organizations, I was interested and concerned to see how possible it was to build a team that was really diverse and was on a surface and intellectual level committed to equal participation and equal voice across many different members of the team from many backgrounds, that still kind of fell down when it came to inclusivity during high pressure decision-making situations. Obviously, there's a lot of incredible research and writing going on right now about power inequality within the development sphere, especially around issues of racism, that I'd encourage everybody to check out. But one place that showed up in particular in our team was around language. I noticed that when we were having high pressure conversations, when things needed to get done fast, just very simple behaviors that we all knew were helpful for communicating across language barriers, for fully including teammates who spoke English really, really well, but not as a first language, tended to disappear. This was obviously really harmful to our colleagues who spoke English as a learned language. It was personally frustrating and painful and professionally harmful. And it was also really harmful for our teams because we lost the ability to draw on their expertise, to use their expertise. Not practicing full inclusivity just made our development work worse. So when I arrived at the LSE, I was just curious to see where these where these norms of conversation were learned, were challenged, were reinforced. When I talked to classmates and colleagues about this during Michaelmas term, one thing that came up over and over again was seminars. I heard from people who spoke English as a learned language, who were fine in lectures, were doing okay as much as any of us were with readings, but then walked into seminars and just had this experience of what is happening? Why is it so difficult to understand comments that native speakers are tossing around among themselves? Why is it so difficult to hop in and articulate my thoughts the way that I see other people doing? So this was kind of what I was lucky enough to focus my research on this year. So I'll show you here, these are some quotes from the raw data. I can share links in the chat later to more for people who are interested in digging into the results. But I'll just leave them up there for you to kind of look at while I talk through some of the methodology and findings. What I did was kind of document the experience of 18 classmates across, I believe, 7 different ID programs. Some people completed an independent reflection by writing it down. Some people chose to record their reflection into their phones. Whichever was easier for the given participant was what we did. And the people reflected on one individual seminar. They came out of a seminar and just shared their thoughts, what they had done before, what they experienced during the seminar, what they were going to do after. Rather than getting a very detailed quantitative picture of different subsets of experience, my goal for this was just to do something a little more exploratory, to get a sense of the range of experiences that were happening as a starting point for the department and for seminar leaders to consider which of their practices were working well and which ones were more challenging. So what I heard from people, I think one of the biggest pieces that surprised me was just a lack of clarity in some cases about what seminars were and did. What is the goal of a seminar? People found it very helpful when seminar leaders articulated what their goals for the class were and how the practices that they were using lined up with that. People struggled in particular with the speech of native speakers. People found it easier to converse with second language speakers of any language background than groups of native speakers in which people sped up, people use slang. It was just harder to jump in. Jumping in general was very difficult. People found that by the time they'd articulated a thought in their head and were ready to share it, the conversation had moved on and they found it tough to jump back in. And just a level of surprise and concern, especially during Michaelmas term. Just they thought they came in, everybody thought they were going to be okay, and the experience ended up being more overwhelming than they expected. So kind of the recommendations that came out of this from talking to participants in a focus group towards the end, there are some just pretty straightforward classroom behaviors that are incredibly helpful that you can see listed there, just around clarifying expectations, mediating conversation, and building consistent structures into each class, rather than running seminars that are purely student-led and student-driven. And then there's broader things that the ID department and other bodies within the university can think about doing better that would make this experience stronger for students coming in. Setting expectations during orientation, naming language as a challenge that people experience as a normal thing, a challenge that is intertwined with the assets of additional cultural and national knowledge, which is especially vital within international development. Fostering social support, as the project before me described, it's overwhelming to jump into a new experience, and especially within master's programs, which are so short, where support from upperclassmen is not available. Intentional actions by departments to put people in conversation with one another early in Michaelmas term can have a profound effect on people's experiences and can reduce this sense of, I am the only one dealing with this. It is a flaw in me. I don't belong here, which is of special concern. And positively signposting the support that does exist. LSE Life, the Language Center, people did name these resources as helpful and found that one-on-one conversations with people who explained that this was a sign of motivation to seek out support rather than a sign of a deficit were very useful.